For centuries, historians, theologians, and critics accepted a rarely questioned assumption. The narrative of the resurrection had been preserved uniformly throughout the Christian world. Many took this as evidence of stability. Others rejected the resurrection itself, yet still assumed the story was the same everywhere. However, this certainty faces a problem. In a region far from Rome, the councils and the later processes of standardization, an ancient Bible survived that does not fully correspond to the version considered definitive. It is a manuscript preserved beyond institutional reach, continuously read and never revised or harmonized. Some scholars began to notice this difference not because the manuscript drew attention, but because it did not align with the others. Its account of the resurrection ends exactly where later versions would add new words. This silence is older than the later attempts to provide reassurance. Its preservation raises a troubling possibility. Perhaps the narrative of the resurrection was never singular. One of its oldest forms survived precisely because no one had the power to modify it. To understand this, it is necessary to return to Christianity before institutional control. Early Christianity did not arise as a centralized system with a defined canon and a single authority. It spread through fragile communities scattered across the Roman world and beyond. These communities preserved what they received because, in many cases, memory was all they possessed. The stories circulated orally before being recorded, and texts were copied before it was determined which were most important. Faith spread faster than authority. Authority came later, not to create belief but to administer it. Today we often encounter Christianity through its institutions, forgetting its initial instability. In the first decades, it was not unified but adaptable. Different communities emphasized different aspects, teachings, miracles, or suffering. What united them was conviction, and conviction does not always produce clarity. The resurrection was the central point of this tension. It determined whether Jesus would be remembered as a teacher, a prophet, a failed messianic claimant, or something far more disturbing to structures of power. An ambiguous or unsettling narrative would hardly sustain an expanding institution. Fear does not unify. Silence does not stabilize, and unanswered questions tend to divide communities. As Christianity expanded, especially as it drew closer to imperial power, pressure increased to make the story of the resurrection clearer. What largely survived was what could be taught with confidence, defended publicly, and explained to new converts in regions that no longer shared culture or language. What did not meet this need simply ceased to circulate. Uncomfortable materials rarely disappear through dramatic censorship. They disappear through neglect. Communities preserve what is read aloud. Texts that generate anxiety eventually fall into oblivion. Within this context, Ethiopia becomes fundamental. The country did not adopt Christianity late. As early as the 4th century, under King Azana, the faith had been adopted at a national level, even before it became dominant across much of Europe. This conversion was not the result of a Roman decree, but developed independently. More importantly, Ethiopian Christianity evolved outside the administrative and theological control of Rome and Constantinople. No council determined its canon. No imperial policy imposed doctrinal alignment. Geography played a decisive role. Mountains and distance ensured isolation. While Christianity in other regions was simplified in order to guarantee institutional stability, Ethiopia preserved what it had received. At the center of this preservation are the Garima Gospels, kept for centuries in the monastery of Abba Garima. Among the oldest complete books of the Gospels in existence, they have been radiocarbon dated between the 4th and 6th centuries. Written in Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopian liturgical language still used in worship, these texts were never forgotten. They were read, copied, and integrated into religious practice across generations. For a long time, Western scholars had difficulty classifying them. A manuscript so ancient and complete did not fit traditional assumptions about the origin of Christian authority. Africa was seen as a recipient, not as a preserver. As a result, these manuscripts remained largely ignored, not suppressed, merely overlooked, and neglect at times preserves as much as secrecy. The most disturbing element of these texts appears in the Gospel of Mark. It has long been recognized that the oldest manuscripts end abruptly. The women find the empty tomb, receive the message of the resurrection, and flee in fear without telling anyone. There are no appearances of Jesus, no instructions, and no consolation. The story ends in silence. Centuries later, additional verses began to circulate, describing appearances of Jesus to the disciples and restoring narrative continuity. These additions became standard in churches, although differences in style indicate a likely later inclusion. The Garima Gospels preserve Mark without this added ending. The text ends where fear remains unresolved. The resurrection is announced, but its emotional consequences remain open. The victory over death is proclaimed, but certainty does not appear immediately. This version presents an experience of the resurrection that is more unsettling than comforting. A faith born from astonishment and shock, not from tranquility. Such a narrative could hardly remain in every context. A resurrection without closure produces questions. Questions produce divisions. Divisions weaken authority. As Christianity grew, councils and theological decisions sought to organize the multiplicity of texts and interpretations. Ethiopia, however, did not participate in this process of reduction. Its Bible preserved 81 books, more than the Western canon, including works such as the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, later excluded in other traditions. These texts remained because no authority demanded their removal. This does not make the Western tradition false, but it reveals that it is not the only memory. The resurrection ceases to appear as an event that immediately resolved every confusion, and instead becomes understood as an occurrence that deeply unsettled its earliest witnesses. The Garima Gospels survived because they were never forced to serve institutional standardization. They remained where power did not reach. Their existence reminds us that history is not always preserved only by authority. Sometimes it is preserved by distance, by neglect, or by communities that simply kept what they had received. Thus, the narrative of the resurrection that we have inherited is not false, but it is not the only one. Recognizing this reveals that the Christian faith was born not from immediate certainty, but from encountering something so extraordinary that it initially produced silence, astonishment, and fear. Thank you for watching. While you are here, do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Click on one of the recommended videos on the screen for more incredible information. See you there.